All right. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about calculation groups. I know that there were a couple of questions as well, and Just also raised a couple of points. But I think that we should take questions at the end. So for now, we'll just punch through this, and then we'll follow up on everything in the end. So calculation groups are this new and very, very exciting feature that so far has only been available for analysis services users, that is, users of analysis services on SQL Server 2019 or Azure Analysis Services. So even though it's an analysis services feature, and we know that analysis services is the engine running underneath of Power BI, then unfortunately, until now, it has not been possible to actually use calculation groups within Power BI. And the reality is that it's just because the user interface of Power BI Desktop does not let you author the calculation groups. You can consume the calculation groups perfectly fine if you're an end user, since calculation groups just look and feel like any other table of the tabular model. So there's no problem in consuming them if you are, for example, connecting using a live connection to analysis services. That works just fine. But being able to create the calculation groups as the model developer, that's not possible. Or until now, that hasn't been possible. But today I'm going to show you how we can do it in Power BI. So the whole purpose of calculation groups is to let us, in a much easier way, reuse DAX logic across all of our model measures. So the classical example of that would be time intelligence. So whenever we've had to add time intelligence calculations to our model, in the past, we'd had to repeat every measure of the model with all of the, year-to-date, month-to-date, quarter-to-date, and so on. And if you weren't using Tabular Editor, that would just become a hassle, especially if your model contains a lot of base measures, stock, inventory, budget, all of that, many different measures. So you'd have to repeat a lot of logic across all of them. If you were using Tabular Editor, well, then you could do something with scripting, like some of the stuff Christopher showed earlier, which would help you automate this, but you would still end up having to somehow maintain a lot of measures in your model, and it could probably take a long while, and also you'd have to learn scripting in Tabular Editor and so on. So now that we have calculation groups, there's an easier way of doing that. One of the other features of calculation groups is that it allows us to apply dynamic format strings. So using calculation groups, we can now have the same measure be rendered with different format strings based on the context. And this is actually quite an interesting thing, because previously we'd had to make some hacks using something like the DAX format function. But the problem of using that was that would render the value of the measure as a text string instead of as an actual numeric value, and that would cause issues with certain visuals. But now we can actually take a measure that returns a numeric value and then apply dynamic format strings to that particular measure. And this is, again, thanks to calculation groups. For those of you that have been working with analysis services multidimensional back in the days, this is sort of similar to the scope statements or calculated members functionality that we had there. I say that it's sort of similar in that it provides us some options that will let us do functionality in the tabular model, which was sort of similar to what we could do in the multidimensional days. But the way we implement it is completely different. So forget everything you know about scope and MDX when you're doing this, because the way you build it, it's completely different what we're doing. So, but it's just, we can achieve the same sort of thing for our end users when we're using calculation groups. So some of the applications for this are being able to set default members. For example, if you have a currency dimension and you want to always default to a certain currency if the user didn't select anything, or you can apply currency conversion with dynamic formatting of the currencies. That's what I'm going to show you in a little bit. And time intelligence, as I said, and you guys can probably think of a lot of other applications. The two Italian guys, Marco and Alberto, they said when this feature was announced 2 years ago for analysis services, that this was going to be the most important feature of analysis services ever since analysis services Tabular came to light. So with that being said, there are a couple of warnings that you should pay attention to if you decide to go into this right now. So for Power BI models, calculation groups requires you to set up the enhanced metadata preview. There's a new preview feature that has been available since the March release of Power BI Desktop. You have to enable that, because once you do that, as you showed earlier, this will upgrade your model to compatibility level 1520, which is a requirement for an analysis services engine requirement for even being able to add the calculation groups in the first place. Also, right now there is a bug in Power BI Desktop, so some of the visuals may not work correctly when you set up dynamic format strings on your calculation groups. So just be aware of that. I should also say that there are also some limitations with the enhanced metadata. So once you enable it, there are certain kinds of Power Query data sources that are no longer supported. So you should also be aware of that. But normally for enterprise BI, where you're just loading all of your model data from a SQL database, then it's not an issue. It's more of if you're using some of the more fancy data sources that are available in Power BI. So just pay attention to this and make some research before you start to just blindly upgrading everything that you have in production. I would also say that even though calculation groups are very powerful and are extremely nice, avoid overdoing it, because the rules of DAX precedence, the calculations that get applied, becomes very, very complicated if you add more than just a couple of calculation groups to your model. So try not to overdo it, even though it's possible, and try to think about how best to use this feature to get the best possible user experience. You cannot secure calculation groups. So if you had planned on restricting some users from only seeing some of the calculation items within a calculation group, then you should just know that's not possible, full stop. And there are also some limitations around direct query and aggregations if you're using any of that. So just be aware. Also, as I said, Tabular Editor is the only way we can add calculation groups to a Power BI model at the moment. Right now, as in today, it's only possible to do it when you're using Power BI Premium or embedded capacity, as you just showed. And of course, you would need XML read-write endpoint to be able to put the calculation group into your model. Later this year, however, calculation groups will also be something that you can add to a Power BI desktop model using Tabular Editor, because at some point in a couple of months, hopefully, Power BI desktop will support external tools making changes to the model that is hosted inside of desktop. And that is actually something that you can do even without a Power BI Pro license. So even if you just don't have a license at all and just downloading Power BI Desktop, then you can even use this feature at that point. So it's enough talk. Let's go over to the demo. So let me see if I can find it here. Can you still see my screen? Christopher, can you confirm you're seeing this Windows image here?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So what I have here is a relatively simple model. This is just our good old favorite AdventureWorks. This model I initially created using Power BI Desktop, imported some tables from a SQL server, and then I published this model to my Power BI embedded workspace. Since I don't have the funds to just spin up a full-blown Power BI Premium subscription. So instead, I just used the technique that just showed us a moment ago by spinning up an A1 SKU of this was the wrong account. Hang on. Spinning up an A SKU of Power BI Embedded, because this then allows me to see if I can log in on the correct account this time. There we go. Because this then lets me use the XML read-write endpoint just as if I had a Power BI Premium subscription. So here we go. I have a workspace here, which has been enabled on my dedicated capacity, where I enabled the XML read-write. And you can see I already took the AdventureWorks model that you saw on desktop a moment ago and published it as a dataset. Now, once I did that, I was able to connect to this model using Tabular Editor, and that's what you see on the screen here. So this is connected to the same workspace, and this is just the way Tabular Editor represents exactly the same model as we saw a moment ago. Now, for this demo, I already prepared one calculation group that applies currency conversion. And this calculation group holds two of these so-called calculation items. One of them, and this is just one way to design currency conversion, but there are many ways you can do that, of course. But the idea here is that on the report, you have to select one of these two calculation items. So if you select currency selector, it means that you will have to use the currency dimension, which is up here, to actually convert the amounts in the model between different currencies. Whereas if you use local currency, then everything will just appear in its local currency. But of course, there are many different ways you can implement these. But the interesting takeaway here is that if you look at the base measures in this model, these are all just very, very simple base measures where I'm just taking a sum of a column. So no fancy logic or currency conversion exchange rates or anything like that going on here. This is just a very, very simple calculation here that we are doing. So the magic happens because of the calculation groups. And let's go into the currency selector first. So basically the logic here says that, okay, assuming that we only selected a single currency, in that case, we're going to iterate through the calendar table because we have different exchange rates per day. And then we're just going to multiply the exchange rate with whatever measure is currently selected. So now we have an expression here for the calculation item that applies to all of the measures of our model. So instead of putting this DAX expression into every single measure, we just wrote it once and used it here in our calculation item. So that's the idea. Let's see how it works. So let me switch over to this instance of desktop. So now you can see the file that I have here. It just shows a couple of measures from this model: internet sales amount, freight amount, extended amount. And you can see I sliced these by the currency dimension, and you can see it just repeats the same amount all over the place. And this is, of course, the behavior since if we look at the model itself, we can see that the currency dimension is not related to any of the fact tables. So instead, the currency dimension is related to the table holding the exchange rates. But that, of course, is not enough to put a filter on the fact tables the way I designed this. So in order for the currency calculation to apply, we would have to use the calculation group. So basically, we pick up this currency calculation, and you can see it just looks like a table here. Let me see if I can scroll a little bit over to the left here. Okay, so for some reason my zoom sort of does not go all the way over to the right. So hopefully you can still read what's on the screen here in the field list. Oh, maybe I can do something like this. No, still not. Okay, never mind. Okay, so my point here is that the currency calculation, even though it's actually a calculation group in the model, from an end user perspective, it just looks like a regular table. And you can see in this case, it's a table with just a single column, the name column. If you don't like the name of this column, you can just change it using Tabular Editor. You can see you have the column right here. It's called name. You can change it to whatever you like. And so then the point is that we want to drag this in as a, let's use it as a page level filter. And then you can see we get the filtering options down here. Oh, and once again, I am having some issues with zoom it here. Nice and slow. Okay, for some reason I can't get all the way to the bottom. But anyway, you can see we have these two options here for using either the currency selector or local currency, and these are the two calculation items that you saw inside the Tabular Editor a moment ago. So these calculation items actually show up as if they were rows on this table or members, if you want. And we can then filter those, and let's see what happens when we do that. So if we take the currency selector, you can see now we get different currencies, different values for each of these currencies. And not only that, but we also get different formatting. And notice how this calculation actually works across all of the various measures in the model. So it doesn't matter which measure we're dragging here, the same calculation just gets applied. So this was actually demonstrating a lot of different things at once. And the way the format string works is that not only can we specify a DAX expression for the calculation, that's the one we saw a moment ago, but if you notice here in Tabular Editor where it says property, there's a drop down. There's another property that holds a DAX expression, which is the format string expression. And here you can see we have a different DAX expression, which basically just says, okay, we want to use the value of the format string column on the currency table, and we want to return that as the dynamic format string that we want to use. In case that is blank, or if multiple currencies are in place, then we're just going to default to the selected measure format string. That's the other DAX function that you saw here. And the selected measure format string will basically just take the original format string on whatever measure we are currently looking at. So if freight had one format string and sales amount had another, and we didn't select a specific currency on our currency dimension, well, then we were just going to get the original format string of whatever measure we were using. And just to show you how the format strings look like, so basically I just added them to my model. So if I write evaluate currency, then you can see that all of the format strings are just specified in the currency dimension here as strings. And that is ultimately, when that gets put into the calculation group here, that's why we end up with this nice table where the same measure has different formats applied. And you'd be able to render this as a chart, or you can export the data as a CSV, and everything would still behave as numeric values and not as strings. So the last thing I'm going to show you is how we can add an additional calculation group, because say now we wanted to add some time intelligence to this model. So in the past we'd had to, as I said earlier, create a bunch of new measures to the model, one for year to date, month to date, and so on. But what we do now is we simply just create a new calculation group, and that's very easy to do from inside Tabular Editor. So just create a new calculation group, give it a name, let's call it time intelligence, and add the calculation items that we need. So let's create one that we call current period, which will just be whatever is currently selected on the calendar dimension. And the DAX expression for this one will just be selected measure, because we're just going to return whatever measure is currently selected. We're not going to modify the filter context or the value or anything like that. We're just going to return the measure as it is. And let's add a couple of more here just to illustrate. Let's add one for year to date. And the DAX expression for that, of course, would be year to date, total year to date, selected measure. And then we have to specify the date. I believe on AdventureWorks it should be, there should be a date column here somewhere. This guy, full date alternate key. That's a fantastic naming here. So we bring this one in here because we have to supply a column containing dates as the second argument to total year to date. And let's do one more. We can just copy this guy, rename it to quarter date. And I guess we have a total QTD function as well. Let's save. And since we were connected to the PBI Premium endpoint, then these new calculation items are now already added to the model. I just saved the changes I made to the tabular model directly back to the Premium workspace. However, one thing you need to be aware of for calculation groups is that when you modify the members or the calculation items within the group, for example, when you add new items or if you rename an item, you'd have to do a process recalc on the model. So oddly enough, you don't need to do a process recalc if you're only changing the measure. The DAX expression. So that works kind of similar to how you can change the DAX expression of a measure and you can see the result instantly. But if you add new items or if you rename any existing items, then you'd have to run a refresh calculate again. But again, thanks to the XML read-write endpoint, that's very easy to do. You can use a script, you can use Management Studio and click process, whatever. So for now, I'll just execute this. So there we go, it's refreshed. And now we should see that our model here contains a new table, time intelligence, and we can also use DAX to examine what the content of that table is. So we evaluate time intelligence, and we can see that it's just a table with 2 columns. One is the name, which is the name of the calculation items, and the other one is an ordinal column. And this one we can use if we want to display the calculation items in a certain order within Power BI Desktop. Then we can set this ordinal value. That's also something we can set from inside Tabular Editor. You can see the ordinal property set right here at the bottom, right here. So setting it to a value will dictate the sort order of the names of the calculation items. But now that we have this, let's switch back to our model here, and then let's bring in. So let's get rid of this this currency stuff. We don't want to use that anymore. Let's get rid of the currency selector as well. And then let's bring in the calendar and say, okay, now we want something with calendar year. And let's go with calendar month. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I just made this demo a couple of minutes before the MSP session started, so I didn't put in much effort in terms of cleaning up the model and making it look nice. You can see I even forgot to order the months in the correct way. Let's just do that, because otherwise it'll be hard to see if the calculation, time intelligence calculation works. So we are going to, on the English month name column, we are going to sort this column by month number of year. We're going to hit save. And then I think when you set the sort by column, then I think you also need to run a refresh calculator on the model. So we're just going to do that just to be safe. Going back to desktop, hitting refresh. And I should say that this version of Power BI Desktop, the report that I'm having here, has a live connection to the Power BI dataset. So basically, when I created this report, I just created it directly from the dataset that was already published on my workspace. Now you can see the months all appear in the correct order. And now the interesting thing comes here. If, let's say, we switch this over to a matrix, and we remove 2 of these measures, and let's bring the months up here, drill down, and then let's bring in our time intelligence as the columns. And there we go. Now we have a nice report here, where we have the current period, the quarter to date, the year to date, everything in there. Oh, looks like it doesn't work actually. That's interesting. So right now the figures don't really sum up. Okay, I'm not sure why that is. That's something I will have to investigate.
Maybe you need to mark it as a date table for the DAX expressions to work.
Maybe you're right. Let's try. Mark calendar ID as a date table with full date alternate key. Let's save. Yes. Let's do another refresh here. Yeah, I think actually you're right, just because it's something to do with the filter context, right? So let's go back here and let's refresh once again. And now this looks much better. Thank you very much, Just. So now we can see at least the year-to-date column seems to accumulate nicely here. Okay, yeah, that's what I want to show you guys today. I hope you enjoyed it. And let's go over to some questions.